Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you. So actually, we're going to start off just by, if I could have each of the panelists, I can call on you, briefly introduce yourselves and briefly share a takeaway from the film or something that resonated with you. And Dr. Neely, we can start with you.
Awesome. My name is Dr. Kirleen Neely. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've worked in mental health now for over 20 years, have a counseling center in San Antonio where we specialize in helping people get over anxiety. My biggest takeaway, and I've seen the film several times, always kind of comes back to we have to continue to be curious. You know, sometimes we feel like we know our spouse, we know our kids, and so we stop asking questions, we stop leaning in and just looking for things that just maybe we didn't notice before. So that curiosity, I think that we can't lose that overall.
Thank you. So true. Dr. Gentry, would you like to introduce yourself and share a takeaway?
Sure. I'm Geoff Gentry. I'm a psychologist. I'm the clinical director at Clarity Child Guidance Center. This is a private, not-for-profit children's psychiatric hospital. I've been here 25 years next month. I evaluated a 12-year-old girl this morning who has really debilitating anxiety, mostly very negative self-talk about some experiences that she's had recently. And I guess the kind of overarching thing for me is that you've created this movie about kids. In my place, we work with kids, and just how great it is that we're seeing this girl at 12 rather than 18 or 26 or 32.
Yeah, that preventative side of the coin is so good. How about you, Stephanie?
Hi, so I'm Stephanie Peterson. I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and I work at Texas State University in the Texas School Safety Center. And I've worked with children, adolescents, parents, and families for over 15 years now. And I think one of the things that we're hearing more and more, especially in the time of COVID, is the reminder that it's okay to not be okay, and the importance of talking to other people and reaching out to other people and being there for other people. I think that was something that I heard again in this film that I think is so important for people to remember and take away.
Thank you. Angela.
Hi, my name is Angela Medellin. I am a registered play therapy supervisor, and I am the executive vice president and co-owner of MindWorks Clinical and Counseling Psychology here in San Antonio, Texas. And part of my job as a play therapist is to really work with those children, ages 3 and up, and be able to provide early intervention and guidance. And my takeaway is really, when I work with parents every day, anxiety is the #1 mental health disorder that I treat on a day-to-day basis. And I tell parents all the time, it is so important that we have early intervention and treatment and to have those conversations at home with your child, because I treat children as early as 3 with anxiety and monsters and worries about, XYZ. So it's super important that we have early intervention to improve childhood prognosis and treatment going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Johnson, and I've been a school counselor for 22 years. I have level elementary, middle, and high school. Right now, I'm currently a crisis intervention counselor at high school. And I think my biggest takeaway is kind of piggybacking on what Stephanie said, that it's okay to not be okay, and we need to continue to have these conversations. I've seen this film about 8 or 9 times, and every time I get a little nugget out of the film, something that I missed maybe the time before in the film. And I think it's just teaching our children and even adults that we need to talk about this, and talking is the first step in recognizing it and putting a word with it, and then just giving some strategies to help them. And it doesn't discriminate. It happens to a lot of different people, and there's anxiousness and then there's anxiety, and them being able to verbalize what that is and how to help themselves, because it is something that can be treated and they can live a successful life with anxiety. So that was my big takeaway.
Thank you. That's awesome. And Kayla?
Hey y'all, I'm still Kayla Aragon. I'm still the program director of David's Legacy Foundation. Every time I see this film, the thing that always sticks out to me the most is hearing these kids and these, teens or whatever age they are saying, I tried to talk to my parents about this. I tried to express this to an adult, and, people brush it off, or people said, oh, that's not what it is, without trying to get that help first. And so to me, the biggest importance of this film and takeaway is starting those conversations and teaching kids not only that it's okay to talk to your parents about it, but teaching the parents that we have to listen, and there's a difference.
And you're about to have a baby. How does that?
I am. I'm 9.5 months. Yeah.
You're like, you're due yesterday or something.
Yes, we're ready.
You're about to have this baby. It is your first one, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I have an amazing stepson who's 5, but this is the first girl coming into the family.
But how nice to be able to get all this information that you can start applying in your parenting.
Oh, yes. And my husband and I have already talked about it many times.
Awesome. Well, so you all know who I am, and I'll just share. I've seen this film obviously many times, and I, like you, I get a different sort of nugget from it each time. And I think it's also because my awareness is changing and I'm learning more. So I may be hearing the same thing, but it has a different application. And I'm learning now that it's so important to speak up, and it is so scary to speak up. And movies like this help model what it looks like to speak up. But more importantly, having that conversation, not to jump in and tell your story, right? Like to be a good listener. And that was always a struggle for me as a mom who's a fixer and a rescuer, to not say, oh, that happened to me too, and then turn it into my story like it's going to help them think they're not alone. We're not listening. So I'm reminded when I see that movie to work on being a better listener, and to just sit with my kids or sit with whoever I'm with that's going through something, and just learning to be there for them.
Can I share something about that? There's a type of therapy that's called trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'm not proposing that for this, but one of the things that the work in that area has done is it shows how we avoid, if we have a child who's had a traumatic event, we avoid talking about it because we don't want to make it worse. And so I think that can happen as well with anxiety, that if we focus on whatever it is that is creating anxiety, we're going to make it worse. But I think with what you're saying, if we're asking questions, it's much less anxiety provoking than if we're making statements and explaining and telling our experience and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I've also, major feedback from the film, just sort of piecing it together through many screenings, is that we need to talk about this so much, but there's also a fine line. Like, you don't need to talk about it all day long. Like, you want to have balance in life, and you want to talk about it and know that we're there always to talk to them about it. But then there's other things you can talk about too, and have that balance. Dr. Gentry, and we have 21 questions here, so I'm going to have a few that we really want to answer that we put together, and then we're going to definitely hit some questions. I might go back and forth. Dr. Gentry, we know that being bullied and cyberbullied can have a direct impact on kids' mental health and anxiety. And with distance learning, the numbers we've seen an uptick in numbers and of cyberbullying, and more awareness, but also surprise from parents. Not all children react in the same way and in the same situation. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen regarding this correlation?
Well, I've heard that. I mean, I've heard the same thing. And one of the things that I would just share with you, there's some good evidence in adolescent brain development that says after kids hit puberty and they're around 13 or so, they shouldn't be in groups unsupervised, because they become somewhat less inhibited and more impulsive, and will take risk in a group and do and say things that they would never do one-on-one with another person. So there's a sort of a, I don't know what you call it, but there can be a sort of symbiotic relationship or thing that goes on when kids are in groups unsupervised. So I think we really got to try to limit that and be aware of when that is going on.
And Dr. Neely, there's a lot of stigma around anxiety and seeking treatment for help, from which the film kind of addresses. But something David's Legacy Foundation has shared is that they hear parents say things like, this is too much to hear, or, oh my gosh, what you're telling me is breaking my heart. And so parents themselves are actually have anxiety about finding treatment for their children and maybe how the family could be viewed. Can you talk about that? But then also the reverse, which is, what about, like parents who are trying to get their kids to talk about it and they won't talk about it?
Yes, I think, two very important things. And so the stigma behind mental health is real, and it's so important for us to address it. But I think what happens to parents a lot of times is that they start to feel overwhelmed themselves, just like you're saying. And so as they feel overwhelmed, then they don't know how to lean into that. And so they think, well, let's not talk about it. But what we know is that what you don't address doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear. And so a lot of times what happens to us in my office is that we see a kid, and one of the classic questions we typically ask is, how long have you been struggling? So sophomore in high school will say, I remember being in 3rd grade, but why didn't you say anything? Well, because I kind of knew that mom didn't want to touch that. Kids are watching us, they study us, they can sense what we're comfortable with and what we're not. So I think, as a parent, and I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, I think some of it is modeling what you want to see, not necessarily oversharing, but talking about, what, I have a presentation and I'm feeling anxious about it, and this is what I'm going to do. So it goes back to the fact that what you sweep under the rug doesn't go away. And if you address it, you're going to be more likely to be able to tackle it. And as a therapist, we love that, because then we're not like 15 years down the road, we're catching a kid early, so that we can actually make a difference.
Have you seen, you treat a lot of families or see a lot of families. Have you seen families that, or rephrase it this way, when families do kind of like own it and lean into it to get help, that actually the world just kind of like comes in to support that? It's not the opposite like what we think it is. It's not like people go, ooh, no play dates with that family or anything like that. Actually, people are hungry for the information that they're getting from their therapy sessions and sharing information.
Absolutely, because we all think it's only us. And so when you begin to talk about it, that shame, that little voice in your head that says, if anybody knew we were struggling with this, once you talk about it, you begin to realize that Sarah next door and John 2 doors down, they're dealing with the exact same thing. And so normalizing it and talking about it changes everything.
Yeah, I have definitely found that in before COVID, when I was actually in rooms with hundreds, if not thousands of people who would come up and say, oh my God, this feels so good to talk about this. So let's see, Kayla. David's Legacy Foundation is the driving force behind David's Law in Texas. And we know that there were a lot of pieces, including, addressing mental health. Can you talk about why the foundation felt those pieces were so important to include? And then also, and I get asked this a lot too, because I talk about David's Law, not nearly as well as all of you, but what about people who don't live in Texas? Like that is one of the biggest questions I get. And then there's a last piece here. The content is equally important, yet not necessarily available in a law. So can you address that whole kit and caboodle of a question?
I can. So first of all, I'm sure you talk about David's Law just fine. We believe in you. I know you've been connected with this family and this foundation for so long. But so there's a lot of pieces that you just kind of threw at me. So I'm going to start kind of with sharing what David's Law is, in case we have some people who aren't as familiar as I am, or some people who maybe aren't from Texas. And I could talk about David's Law for the entire hour that this panel is going to happen. But the point is, it was passed and went into effect in 2017 after the Molak family and their entire community of supporters came together to make this a reality over the year after they lost David. It's a bipartisan law. And it affected the criminal, the civil, and the education codes, which has its own definitions. But really the important pieces that I want to make sure we pull out are that it allowed students an anonymous reporting outlet, which is something that we heard from students that was wanted. And part of the work that went into creating this law was that the foundation and the Molaks met with anybody who the law may affect. So attorneys, parents, teachers, superintendents, anybody who would listen and participate in conversation so that we could make sure that we were making the most comprehensive law, that affected the cyberbullying. And so we allowed, the students kept saying they wanted that anonymous reporting tool. So we made sure that that was included. We also worked to make sure that there is no geographical proximity to cyberbullying. And so we wanted to update the laws that existed to be more modern, to include things like cell phones and text messages, and, that it's not just a repeat action anymore. When we talk about bullying, it can be a single significant act that is liked and shared and commented on, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. Really, and the third part of that is that we gave schools the ability to investigate things that are happening either off campus and or happening outside of regular school hours, because it does affect students at school. So that's my summary of David's Law. But if we're coming back into the mental health piece of it, it was important that we included that, because when we start talking about mental health, we have to make sure that everything is working together, right? And so to take cyberbullying seriously and to make this work, we have to understand the consequences, and that includes not just the consequences of the aggressor, but it includes the mental health of the child and all those who are involved. So when we're creating a law, we have to address the entire picture, and having resources for not only the victims, but the aggressors is what is needed for, the healing process to really begin. And so importantly, we want to talk about that it's not just the victim or the target of bullying that is addressed when we talk about the mental health aspect. It's the aggressor. It's the parents who are watching their child go through this. It's an upstander. It's a bystander. It's the school community. It's the friends. It's the family. And so it's important to everybody. And so when we passed the law, it created the framework to have the conversations that we're having now, and to bring to light this issue of public health, mental health, and how that works together with school safety, good citizenship, online positive digital footprints, because really the future of our kids is at stake. And, if I'm going to throw some statistics at you, which, I can't help myself, the CDC is saying that over 36% of kids are going to be involved in bullying in some capacity. And if we're looking at just Texas, Texas has almost 5.5 million students enrolled in school right now. So if we look at that statistic alone, we're looking already at almost 2 million kids who are going to be involved in bullying in some capacity. So when we created David's Law, the whole point behind including that mental health aspect is that we wanted it to start with prevention and go all the way through the healing process for all those who are involved.
Well, and also just know that there's consequences, right? Like for the families of, I think about it as when there used to be big parties, and then I think it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving and other organizations that came together to say, look, if you're the parent and your kids underage are having a party and then they go out and drive and they get into an accident, that family has some liability. And I think applying that here, I'm a fan of it. I think that it brings awareness. It makes parents lean in. Let me tell you, all of a sudden parents were like, no drinking at this house, or people have to spend the night if you are. Like suddenly they were much more participatory. And I think that helps. Creating these guardrails and these seatbelts in this, world of the internet, I think we're learning and finding kind of things that work. Can you answer the piece or just address a little bit, like when I talk about David's legacy or David's Law, and people, in Florida or in Arizona or North Dakota, like, well, what about us? What do we do?
Yeah, absolutely. We encourage you to do, if this is something that you feel strongly and passionately about, there's other states that do have similar laws. I believe Maryland has what's called Grace's Law. David's Legacy Foundation is open to helping in any capacity we can. We are not the territorial organization. You know, if somebody reached out to us, we're like, here's everything we know, here's everything that we've done, here's everything that I can possibly give you. What can I do to help? And so it does get fuzzy, you know, when we start to cross state lines, because every state has their own policies and their own kind of quirks in the system. And, you know, as a Texas organization, I don't know that I can address every quirk in every state, but we do not withhold any of our information. We help in any capacity we can, regardless of the state. You know, it's a long process. It's a grueling process to get that passed. There was a lot of work that went into it, but if it's something that somebody feels passionate about, I mean, like we talked about, cyberbullying is not based on being close to each other, right? Kids have access to their phones and to their social media, and they're texting 24 hours a day worldwide. I mean, we talked about that in the movie too. So if that's the case, how can we make sure that this law, or, you know, the important parts of this law, cover everywhere that social media and the cyber land also covers? So we help in any way that we can.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to just do one more, and then I might go to some of the audience questions. Stephanie, your work at the Texas School Safety Center involves mental health and threat assessments. So we know that bullying and cyberbullying is considered a threat to school safety as well as mental health. Is this true? Oh, and it's also true for the aggressor and the targets, both involved. The National Threat Assessment Center says that 80% of violent school aggressors have been victims of bullying themselves. What is the Texas School Safety Center doing to make our schools stronger and safer?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'd like to start by providing a little background on the Texas School Safety Center. The Texas School Safety Center has existed for almost 20 years now, serving schools and communities in creating safe, secure, and healthy environments. The center is actually tasked in the Texas Education Code and the Governor's Homeland Security Strategic Plan with key school safety initiatives and mandates. So the Texas School Safety Center serves as essentially a clearinghouse for the dissemination of safety and security information. And we do that through research, training, and technical assistance. And we do that for K through 12 schools and junior colleges throughout the state of Texas. So we essentially believe in preparing today so that we can have a safer tomorrow. And one of the ways that we support schools and districts is through providing training, education, resources, and tools. So we provide training for school-based law enforcement, school staff and administrators. We provide resources for school staff, parents, and students. We also provide toolkits, videos, and resources on topics including mental health, bullying, cyberbullying, and threat assessment. So you mentioned the National Threat Assessment Center's analysis of targeted school violence and their findings related to the majority of attackers having a history of being a target of bullying. I want to clarify that this doesn't mean that if a person has been a target of bullying that they will become an attacker. What this means is that if we can provide a way to identify a person who's on the pathway to violence, and then working to get them off that path, then we can perhaps prevent those violent incidents from occurring. Excuse me. Behavioral threat assessment and management provides a proactive and evidence-based approach for identifying those individuals who can pose a threat to themselves or to others, and providing interventions before that incident occurs. So it's essentially a way to identify, assess, and manage individuals who are at risk for violence against themselves or others. So in 2019, the Texas legislature continued to strengthen and increase school safety and mental health supports through the passing of several comprehensive bills, one of which is Senate Bill 11. So Senate Bill 11 added mental health initiatives and essentially created the Safe and Supportive School Program team. And that team addresses threat assessment in public school districts and open enrollment charter schools. And one of the responsibilities of that team is threat assessment. The Texas School Safety Center, in coordination with TEA, has developed model policies and procedures to assist districts in establishing those teams and making sure that that they know how to do threat assessment. Collectively, the members of each threat assessment team has expertise in counseling, behavior management, mental health and substance abuse, classroom instruction, special education, school administration, and law enforcement, in addition to a few other areas. So behavioral threat assessment and management, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's evidence-based, and the approach is towards identifying students or others who may pose a threat. So these teams assess any behavior or communication that raises concern, including threats of violence or harmful, threatening, or violent behavior, which can include fighting, self-harm, bullying, cyberbullying, and other behaviors. Everyone has a role to play in creating a safe school climate. It's important that students and staff are able to recognize harmful and violent or threatening behavior, and that they feel empowered to speak up to report threats or behaviors to the team. So in addition to the creation of the Safe and Supportive School Program team, the legislature also provided school staff and students with additional training, education, and resources on mental health, including mental health awareness, substance use, suicide prevention, and digital citizenship, to name a few. As we just saw in the film, anxiety and other mental health conditions can seriously impact a student at home and at school. And we know that the psychological effects of bullying and cyberbullying include anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, thoughts of suicide or homicide, and even coping through self-harming behavior and substance use. It's critical that students and school staff are supported in their awareness and their understanding of mental health and co-occurring substance use disorders, so that any students who are struggling with a mental health condition, such as anxiety, or those who are bullying others or who are a target of bullying, so that students can then be connected to help and support prior to that problem escalation, and then further academic or emotional deterioration. The film is so powerful, in my opinion, with helping us understand how and to what extent anxiety disorders can impact the lives of our young people. And I want the takeaway to be this: help is available. It is important that you know that you are not alone. If you are feeling overwhelmed, please talk to somebody. If that person isn't hearing you, talk to somebody else. Keep talking to somebody until you find somebody that is hearing you. Or if you know somebody who is struggling, reach out to that person and get them connected to help. Because so often it's hard for us to ask for help. If we are feeling so anxious or so depressed, it's hard for us to ask for help. So if you know somebody who is going through that, get them connected to help. If you don't know where to turn, or you don't feel like you have anyone else to talk to, there is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which provides 24/7 free and confidential support for anyone who is in distress, and they also provide resources.
Thank you. Kathy, school counselor, the glue of the school. I've come to love and be a super fan of school counselors. They're like right on the front lines, parents and kids and administrators and teachers. You're like the control.
We're busy.
So I have to just read this because I don't want to get their statistics here. According to the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance from 2017, which is the most up-to-date statistics that we have, Texas numbers are comparable with national numbers on all accounts except for the number of youth who will attempt suicide, resulting in an injury that needs to be treated. On this account, Texas is almost double the national average. The national average is 2.4. Texas average is 4.5. 2019 numbers will be released this fall. Those numbers could drastically change from the 2019 to the 2020 based on what's going on. What are you anticipating in these numbers based on what you're hearing from your students?
Well, this was our first week back with our teachers, and I can tell you that I've already seen a big increase with anxiety with our staff just during this difficult time. It's really difficult on a lot of people, adults and children. I've been in this position for 3 years, and I've seen over the last 3 years an increase every year. And there's a couple reasons why. I think we're starting to have the conversations, and we're starting to really educate our staff and our students and to let them know it's okay to not be okay. And it really honestly started with angst. I've been here 3 years. When I had seen angst, I brought it back, and my goal was to educate, create awareness for parents, for staff, and for children. And so because we're educating them, they're more aware of their feelings and they're not afraid to talk about it. So that being said, what do I anticipate moving up the next semester, the next year? Well, I can tell you during virtual learning, in the spring when COVID started, I was having kids reaching out to me even more because the isolation, the unknown, when are we going back? I already had students that were struggling already with school and the pressures and AP exams and wanting to get into college and just the academic achievement that they put pressure on themselves. And then I had students that maybe already just had a little bit of anxiety, but it just got bigger. And as we think about the isolation, even for adults, our kids were on their phones because that was their only way to connect with each other. So 24/7. So even this week, I've had so many students email me and parents reach out to me worried about their child. First of all, are we going to go back? When are we going to go back? I don't know about this class. We're going to be doing virtual for the first 3 weeks. You can just feel it in the email and the tone and the conversations. And so and we don't even know what they've been through already. They might have had a family member that has had a COVID. A parent might have lost a job. I have some of my students working 2 jobs to help pay bills because one parent lost their job. And so there's just a lot of things going on in our world that has just really increased, I think, a lot of our stress and mental health. And like I said, even with adults. So, our plan, it's going to be virtual. We're starting right now, going to be virtual until September 7th. We have a plan. We're working with our teachers about how are we going to watch over these kids virtually. And we're training them to make connections every single day. And there's ways to do it. It's a little bit more challenging than face-to-face, but you can still build relationships. And we're being very creative, and there's ways that we can check in with students, and we will. And even the counselors in our district, they're coming up with very creative ways from elementary to middle to high school to check on these kids. And I think the biggest thing is for parents, I think one of the questions was, how am I going to help my child with their anxiety when they go back? Or how am I going to help them when I'm at home with them? And the big thing is communicate. Communicate with the teachers, communicate with the counselor, and we can help because we do have the tools and we know how to talk to kids about these, and we're trained. And, we've done some mental health training for our staff. We do it every year. We go into the classrooms. We're still going to go into the classrooms. It's going to look a little different. We're going to be Zooming in the classrooms. We're going to still be doing those important lessons, and we're videotaping. We've already videotaped ourselves for the first week, so they know who their counselors are, so they are not afraid to email or ask for help. We intend to go into Zooms and to go into a breakout room if a child's struggling. And so it's training the teachers so they can look for things, because they might see some children withdrawal or not being active, or they're not logging on, or they're not showing up for class, especially at the high school level, because they may be home by themselves. So, and some older kids are taking care of the younger siblings. And so that's a big worry for a lot of parents. So I anticipate there's going to be an increase with a lot of stress and with our mental health just in general. And I think the biggest thing is we just have to have support systems for our children, and also for our staff, and also for our parents, because we have a lot of parents that are juggling homeschooling and working, and it's a lot. It's a lot. So my big advice is to reach out to the school, because I'm a school person and we need to know so we can help. And that's the first step, because where do you go? Go to the counselor, go to the teacher.
Thank you. I'm in a lot of these Q&As, and you hear such great ideas. One of the ideas I heard, because so many people are worried about children going into the classroom and all these masks, and they can't read the same body language or the same facial, kind of signals. And So they are going to put a picture of the teacher without the mask smiling on the wall so that at least when they're looking, they can see, oh, that's what my teacher looks like without a mask. And she's actually smiling, and it actually will kind of change their little biorhythms. Yes, Dr. Gentry.
So at our hospital, we have got these buttons that our staff wear that shows their staff picture, their photo, so they can see what the person actually looks like.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Even walking down the street with the masks, I try to smile with my eyes so they know I'm smiling, and I kind of nod. I'm like trying to be more animated, and they just kind of like look at me like I think they're looking at me like I'm weird, but I'm guessing maybe they're smiling. You know, it's just, you don't know anymore. Angela, we're gonna hear from you, creative play, and then we're gonna get to, we have 36 questions here. So I want the audience to be part of this conversation. Dr. Neely, Dr. Gentry, get ready because there's a lot in there for you guys. Angela, it's hard to know what students are going to be feeling until we're actually back, over these coming weeks. David's Legacy Foundation, is seeing an increase in cyberbullying since schools closed and everything moved to distance learning last spring. You specialize in play therapy with little kids, or actually, how old do you actually treat up to?
2 to 17.
Okay. Oh, awesome. I wish, play therapy is even great for adults.
Yes.
So you specialize in therapy with children who have anxiety and may have additional insight into this, but can you address how play therapy would look different for a target of for the target of bullying, the bystander, and the aggressor, so to speak, I guess, the bully.
Yeah, so sure, play therapy, I want to start with that. It is an evidence-based treatment that's good for children of all ages, ages 2 all the way to 17, and even some adults with sand tray and sand play. And so it's good for all ages and developmental stages. But when working with a target of bullying, therapy would be utilized to address any anxiety or trauma associated with being a target of bullying. Part of our role would be to support the child and the parents in being able to overcome any depression, anxiety, or any negative feelings of self-worth the child may have. But when we work with a bystander, we want to be able to empower them to be an upstander and empower them to make a positive impact against bullying. Sometimes witnessing bullying can be even upsetting for the bystander. It can negatively impact their self-esteem. It can make them feel powerless towards a situation. They may wonder, can this happen to me? If I take a stance, will I also get bullied? So they're very different approaches. And then, working with the aggressor and addressing that would be a different approach, because we want to help the child or the teen work through their own internal struggles that led them to become the aggressor in the first place. And so that would be part of the treatment plan. And sometimes aggressors, have family and systemic issues that, led them down that path. And so we would want to address the family as a whole and develop an individualized treatment plan for every child and teen to get their needs met, while also providing psychoeducation and guidance to the family.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, boy, we got some good questions in here. Real quick, Kayla, I understand David's Legacy Foundation has some family activities. Do you want to just touch on those for like 2 seconds? Because they're going to be put in a dashboard, they're going to be shared with everybody, so everybody gets it in their digital goodie bag. Do you want to just give a little glimpse into what they are?
Yep. So we worked with a specialist to create some curriculum that connected the dots between this movie and cyberbullying, and kind of connecting the pieces of the conversation. And they are all going to be downloadable, and we're sending packets out from the office. But the specialist worked to make sure that they're age appropriate, that they are appropriate and helpful regardless of what your family demographic looks like, age, gender, nationality, all of the above and more. So they're appropriate and helpful for all families. And so we're going to be sharing those out complimentary to anybody who is ready to take them. We're also going to be sharing resources from the Texas School Safety Centers. And Angela has provided some stuff on play therapy. They'll all be together on our website.
Okay, where do we start? We've got some great questions here. How do we support those with anxiety instead of enabling the behaviors or responses to triggers? I think that got upvoted quite a bit. So how do we, Dr. Neely or Dr. Gentry, if you might want to jump in on this, how do we support those with anxiety instead of enabling the behaviors or responses to triggers?
I think this is such a great question, especially for a parent, because a lot of times when your kid's struggling, you just want to be there. And I think that natural instinct is to kind of will take the anxiety away. So, you don't want to go order your food. I'll do it for you. And so what we know about anxiety is that the more you avoid it, the bigger it gets. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's about leaning in. It's about helping them to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, because the more they're able to do that, just like they talked about in the film, the more you're able to do that, the less the anxiety feels like a monster. So getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
And can you just roll right into this next question? Because I think they really piggyback onto each other. This school year, our kids won't be able to leave the classroom as freely as last year. And what are some tips if a student can't leave the room and has anxiety? And let's just say that was the plan, right? Like you come up with a plan for your kid at school, but now the rules have all changed and and they're changing even as they're going back. How do you deal with that uncertainty?
One place to start, my son finally convinced me a couple of years ago to Google it when I don't know the answer. Just today, I Googled tips for coping with anxiety, and I came up with a list of about 10 things you can do in place. And they have to do with, there's a 3-3-3 technique where you identify, you see three and name 3 things around you. You listen for 3 sounds, you identify those, and then you do 3 kinds of movements. So it's really, those are all really grounding techniques. And so when I think about anxiety, I really focus on what is the zip code of the source of the anxiety? Is it internal? Is it something going on with me? Is it something external that I'm worried about out there? Or is it a combination of both? And by doing that, we began to, one of the psychiatrists in the film said something about, if you can't use words, try to use words. Because that's the thing is that, I see it in layers where maybe kids have some negative thinking habits and some negative expectations and like that. And then they come into a situation and like was described in the film, it goes from their negative thinking, that gets turned off because of the fear. And then all of a sudden you get this, fight or flight kind of syndrome. But I would say anxiety is the thing that presents most in outpatient settings. It's just the number one thing. And we know a lot about it and we do well with it. And there's a lot of information out there that is pretty straightforward. There's like 3 or 4 categories, primary categories of anxiety, and there's kind of some approaches to work with those. And if they're mild, parents can learn some things. One of the questions here tonight, or it was a tip, was about a book called Freeing Your Child from Anxiety. So I don't know the book, but I bet it would be very useful for a lot of parents who really want to get more educated about what's going on.
And I was just going to piggyback on the school part because I'm in the school. And I just want to tell you that we're always going to do what's best for the child. So even when we go back and maybe there's a perception that we're not going to be able to have breaks, we're always going to do what's best for the child. So it's communicating to the teacher, whether you're in elementary school, my child has anxiety, sometimes in the past she's taken breaks, what can we do? And it's like a conversation maybe the teacher's going to have with the child, like when you're feeling that way, let me know. And, maybe you can come over to this side of the room, or, you can listen to some music and, we can give our kids strategies. I know a lot of the teachers are going to be doing mindful minutes and teaching kids those coping skills, because that's how they can work through that. Sometimes it's simply just getting up and getting a drink of water, and then it kind of changes that path of that anxiety. And at the high school level, if there's a diagnosis and we know about it, the teacher can just message me or the counselor, and we can go over there and, we're going to still be allowed to talk to kids even when we go back. We may be wearing masks and we're going to be social distancing, but we're still going to take care of kids. And so I think just communicating with the people in school, the people that are going to be with your child most of the day, let them know, and we can come up with a plan for them. Just like we have a 504 plan for kids that need accommodations. We're going to continue to do that. We're not going to stop just because of this. We're going to take care of them. And I just want everybody to know that. And if you just can reassure to know that we're in the kid business, and we're going to take care of your babies, and we're going to do it. Maybe it may look a little different, but we're still going to take care of them.
But I think that points to where we as parents need to be careful to check out the zip code of our own anxiety. How much of it is internal? How much is external? My son is a sophomore at a local college, and in the parent group that I'm in, you see stories that are kind of already expecting the worst, or questions from parents that are already expecting the worst, and you just feel the anxiety in the questions. Rather, so it's kind of a setup for the kid, you know. So I guess what I'm saying is, in a sense of resilience, is to try to have as positive an outlook and expect the best and project that to your kid.
Can I break that down a little bit more? You know, in the film, we actually reference the fact that, and I'm going to take two questions in the Q&A. I'm going to combine them into one. And Dr. Neely, I'd love for you to answer it. Is you know, that we referenced in the film that a certain percentage, which is 50% or more, could be genetic, that a child has anxiety. But what about a parent who has anxiety and they're having to deal with an anxious child and going back to school, or, you know, just the uncertainty of all the different variables of going back to school? Any tips for you know, those parents?
You know, I think it really starts out with, you have to take a look in the mirror first. I love what you just said, because so many times I'll have a parent who will bring a child in and they'll say, well, you know, I have Sarah here because she's having anxiety. And, you know, I'm listening to mom just get her words out, and I can tell she's struggling too. So it's, you know, being okay, like we said so many times, with not being okay, and being okay that you may need to go get some help, because that's modeling that behavior for your kid. There's nothing like being able to say, you know what, I'm going to get, I call it a couch time check-in. You know, I'm going to go check in and do a little couch time, because all of a sudden that stigma starts to break down, and your kid starts going, wait a minute, so mom goes and sees someone and I admire her, I look up to her, then maybe there's nothing wrong with me going.
And you and I've actually been on other panels together, and you said something that I thought, it just really changed me. And I'm kind of like, really thinking this, we got to figure out a way to make this happen. But you were talking about you know, we take our cars in for tune-ups, we go in for a physical, we go in to get our teeth cleaned and checked. Why are we not doing an annual mental health checkup? And because just I want to break this down, because I know there's a lot of parents who are watching right now who either don't have the resources or the time or the energy, or they can't go out like to figure out all the proper steps. How can we do sort of a self mental health check-in? Can we go to a primary care physician to do it? Like, how can we kind of start implementing some of that on our own a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, and anybody else can answer as well, but yes, I know our primary care physicians, they usually do like a brief screening, especially when you're going for an annual. But I think sometimes, you know, on those screenings, to be honest, we kind of just check, because I'm there to check on my cholesterol. And so there's a lot that's missed in those screenings. I think it really starts off with saying, what am I feeling and why am I feeling it? Very simply, just ask yourself that question, because you'll be surprised of what comes up. And if something comes up that you're uncomfortable with, then call someone, call a therapist, go in and call a counselor and sit down and have that conversation. So asking that powerful question, what am I feeling and why am I feeling it? And not running from it, but leaning into it.
Can I just add too that for families who either don't have access to a counselor or don't have finances to see a counselor, there are free counselors that are available in faith communities. So in your churches or synagogues, a lot of times there's free counseling. And then there's a lot of local agencies and nonprofits that can either do a no fee or a sliding fee schedule.
That's perfect. I love that. You know, there's 3 most asked questions in every Q&A basically, and we've kind of asked 2 of them. One of the questions that gets asked a lot is why we didn't mention medication in the movie. And the simple truth is that none of the students brought it up. It was a very organic filming process, and some of the students were on medication with therapy or supervision. We don't judge about medication. It's good for some and not for others. But there's a question here, if anyone would like to take it. just about what are your thoughts on having young kids, elementary school age, take SSRIs to help with anxiety, along with working with a therapist to learn coping strategies? I think it's probably thinking more like the age, like at what point, is that too young? Is that an okay age to administer medication?
My opinion about that is you got to exhaust their therapy options. I don't think you
First, yeah.
don't start with both. You got to exhaust therapy options, and it needs to look, in my opinion, kind of hopeless to get somewhere with therapy. And I think that would be an unusual situation. If it's, there's layers there. There's the negative thinking, there's the going into flight, fight or flight, and then there's brain issues. Brain is like the hardware, and then the mind is like the software. And if there is damage in the hardware, then sometimes, and it depends on how much, then it can make it hard for the software to run. And to me, that's what the medication is for, when there is damage to the hardware. But we want to do everything we can, and we want to, just like with medication, if this therapy doesn't fit, if this therapist doesn't fit, and there's evidence in the research literature right now that says that the fit between the person who's seeking help and the person who's providing help is the best predictor of the outcome. And if you don't have a good fit and you're not getting a good result within some limited period of time, then you need to try something else or someone else. And that's not a knock on the provider. There's just got to be some chemistry there, not to mix metaphors.
So I get that question a lot. It comes out probably 9 out of 10 times when I'm in a parent session, are you gonna give my child medication? Are you recommending medication? And so I've treated children, as young as 3 that are on medication, and parents ask me this all the time. And so, as a play therapist, that's not my go-to. My go-to is, evidence-based modalities and treatment. But, in my practice, we're very integrated. So we have a physician that provides medication management. We have a psychologist that does testing, and we have evidence-based therapists. So we all work together collaboratively in our private practice to be able to treat the children before we just pull the trigger and give medication. But part of the resistance that I find as a play therapist is that parents are not open to having a conversation about medication. It's not the go-to, and I agree with Dr. Gentry that we need to try everything and exhaust all of our resources. But sometimes I find resistance with parents when that medication would help alleviate the situation, even temporarily or maybe for a longer period of time. But it's just having that dialogue and educating themselves about genetics and how sometimes biology gets in the way, and there's nothing the child can physically do to make the anxiety go away. And so I have that conversation a lot with parents and talking about brain development and discussing, what medication looks like for the child, as well as, evidence-based, play therapy. But it is something that I think, in my opinion, I would like parents to be more open about that conversation and really being able to ask a physician or ask their psychiatrist or, have those conversations about how we can alleviate the child's anxiety.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think the other thing is that for a parent, it's so scary. You think about your little 4-year-old being on meds and it's going to change them. A lot of what I hear is, I don't want to change her personality. I don't want to change who she is. And so I think we have to validate that as a parent. It's scary if your kid's 4 or 14, that same fear that something's going to be different with your kid really shows up. I think we have to validate that fear and then, move into exactly what you said, which is to kind of help step them through it and take them through those steps and let them know that you're going to work with a team who's not going to dope your kid up to where they're not themselves anymore.
And if you see that kind of anxiety in a kid at that age, then I'm thinking trauma, and that needs to be explored. Mm-hmm. And I think when you see that in a kid at that age, you're also going to see aggression, out of control behavior, maybe speech limitations. And I've seen a few cases where medication actually helped with that and even improved speech. But that's where with kids that have complex developmental trauma, I don't think you see anxiety like we're talking about in 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds and a 3-year-old.
How do video games and technology increase anxiety levels in our kids? And I mean, they're home and they can, what else are they going to do in certain instances? What can we do besides control the amount of time they spend on there?
Well, it's avoidance for one thing. In the real world,
Mm-hmm.
pre-pandemic, it's part of that. And I think Dr. Neely maybe referenced this earlier about the avoidance cycle. So you're anxious about something, you avoid it. Wow, it worked. So now you're increasing your long-term anxiety risk. And I think that, you know, the phone and all that stuff, it is a paradox. I mean, it's a catch-22 right now because it's the way that kids can be connected. So I'm not sure, Dr. Neely, what do you think about that?
You know, what I've seen that I thought was really neat is that obviously because of COVID, kids are on probably their electronics more than ever before. But I had a parent who said that, you know what, we started that her and her husband play spades. And so they decided, you know what, they're old enough for me to teach them how to play this card game. And so they took some of that time that would typically be spent on the electronic, isolated, and they said, let's do family game night. Let's make it competitive. Let's make it fun. Let's pull out different games. They said that they even, you know, somebody got to control the music. So different genres of music, and they learned so much. They learned what their kids were listening to and what they were interested in. And the kid also learned the same thing. So I think that we got to get really engaged. We got to be creative, and we got to come up with things that are going to take the kid out of that room and create that family dynamic again.
Yeah, it's kind of getting back to the old school way of entertaining ourselves. And we do the same. I love it. There is this.
Can I just share something about the cyberbullying part of it? Just so I, as a play therapist, you know, I play video games. I play Five Nights at Freddy's, Roblox, Minecraft, you know, because parents ask me all the time, are these games appropriate for my kids? So I get in there and I start playing with, you know, PlayStation. I basically own all the consoles so that I can, you know, educate myself on what's happening out there. But, you know, we've definitely seen an uptick in anxiety for sure for children. The COVID situation is obvious, but, you know, not only that, but there's so much access to screen time. And with the access to screen time comes, you know, the potential for online bullying. Mm-hmm. And what I've noticed is an increase in the cyberbullying and online gaming because mm-hmm. players can create their own avatar or their character and they can target or harass other players online. And so the characters that you create in a video game allows for you to be completely anonymous and bully somebody without any accountability for your behavior. And so, for example, you know, when children tell me, you know, I played Minecraft today and I was in creative or survival mode and somebody blew up my house or somebody teased me or somebody trolled me is what kids say, you know, and their worlds are being, you know, destroyed virtually. And that's, you know, that's a target of bullying. But also, you know, games like Roblox have created avenues for bullying or having other players being excluded from a game. So if you're all in a Roblox game together and you're playing and all of a sudden your friends gang up on you and said, you know what, I'm going to exclude you from the game, then that's another source of rejection. Mm-hmm. So the children mm-hmm. I see, they tell me I'm getting rejected on the playground, but then my friends don't want to play with me virtually. And so I have nobody to talk to. And so I've definitely seen a rise in, you know, online gaming and cyberbullying because that's a conversation I have with children mostly every day and talking to parents about, you know, putting screen time guidelines and really checking on YouTube and what are they watching because there's been so much access to screen time and so much cyberbullying happening with the children and it's happening at a younger age.
Mm-hmm. And with social media too, not just with gaming, but social media as well. Yeah.
Kids, it just violates a principle that is very clear in adolescent brain research right now, is that kids should not be unsupervised in groups. They will do things that, like the kid who's anonymously bullying another kid, if those kids were together in person with an adult present, they wouldn't do that.
And our office is seeing the same thing, you know, from the other side of it is we've been getting calls from parents saying, do you know how these kids talk to each other on X, Y, and Z app? Like, have you heard of do you know what, you know, X, Y, and Z means? And so, you know, we're hearing it too, not just from the kids, but also from the parents who now have, I don't know if it's more access or they're more vigilant or, you know, how that's kind of how they're getting this information, but it's come to our office as well that parents are now questioning how these kids are talking to each other and what that looks like.
Another great question here. In these times, how do we communicate with our children about what's going on without increasing their level of insecurity or anxiety?
One thing I would say, and I talk with parents about this a lot, and also with psychology interns I train, is to think about the ratio of your questions to your statements and your explanations. and also think more about sharing your experience rather than explaining stuff or giving instructions. I mean, asking questions and being interested. Like I remember when I picked my kid up at school, you know, I would say something like, guess what I did today? And I would get him to guess, you know, and we'd kind of work our way toward it. But I just, one of the girls in the movie said, they said, what do they need? She was asked something like, what do you need, or something like that. And she said, for parents to listen.
I also think it depends on the age of the child, but being careful what you're saying in front of your children, what you're listening to. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they were nervous about sending their child to school, and the child was younger, but she was, you know, going through all the emotions of going back to work and what am I going to do with daycare and what am I going to do with schooling. And I reminded her that they're little ears that are listening. And so her own processing out loud, although it's helpful, you know, depending on the situation and depending on the age of the child, to just be aware of that as well.
Yeah.
Who's listening.
Yeah, I think having the news on, I mean, I know at the beginning, I had the news on a lot, like right at the beginning when school was being canceled, and I was just trying to learn more for me. But, you know, we don't realize that our kids are watching or they can hear and things like that. And then also just being honest, like, honey, I don't really know when, but you know what, we're going to be okay, and kind of making it a positive thing. One thing, you know, the kids they have grieved all this lost trips. The seniors, I think about all the things that they lost their senior year at the end. And so one thing we did is we talked about being grateful. And so every night at the dinner table, we had more family dinners, more home cooked meals, more family game nights. But that was something that we tried to do because I had a college student that she was, you know, grieving her own things with college and not being up at school. And then I had my 9-year-old and they were both grieving different things. And so it was kind of like, well, let's think about something that we're grateful for and just kind of spinning it. And again, they feed off the parents. But I think I had a little bit of, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, when are we going back? Are we going back in April, or is it going to be May, or like, are we even going back? And so because they feed off of us, it just trickles down. So I think we just, once I realized, and I think my husband told me, you know, the news is on, they can hear a lot. So I stopped having the news on all the time, or I would do it more privately to just update, you know.
Well, and the news is like, I mean, we hear all the time, like, they won't talk about the 300,000 planes that landed safely. They talk about the one plane that had trouble, and then they play it on a loop over and over. So you just sort of think, oh, flying's not safe, when actually it is very safe. Or we don't really talk about all the people that haven't had COVID or that have survived it, or that we only hear about more death and more, like,
right.
And it's all the negative sort of slant on everything.
I'm sorry. One more thing I wanted to add. I also think that when there's the concern about getting sick, something that I have found is helpful is, you know, reassuring the child that if we get sick, there are doctors who can help us get better. And so just reassuring that child.
We have a question from, I think, a teacher, which I think is great. We've been talking a lot about parents for kids, but it says, I feel a lot of anxiety with teachers and staff in regards to the unknown and worry of getting sick once kids return to class. Any suggestions for helping staff during this pandemic?
Well, the evidence from international studies suggests that the transmission is actually more the other way, from teachers to kids, when it does happen. So, you know, what we might expect may not be what is actually the case.
And I think just like we do with everybody else, like, allow staff to talk about it. You know, just because we're adults doesn't mean we don't need that space too. So sometimes just being able to let them know that we care and we want to hear what's going on and we want to hear what you feel. Yes, we can't fix it. We can't make it better. You still have to go to work and wear the mask and all those things like that. But letting people know that, you know, we actually care about what you're feeling, I think makes a world of difference.
And we're going to be doing some support groups for teachers and just different things. Again, creative ways to support our teachers, because I noticed the first day it was hard for some of them. They had never really even left the house since March. So it was hard. But at day 2, it was a little bit better. And I think once they realized that we were all following safety protocols, it kind of eased a little bit of that. And, so it's just, and I'm checking on those teachers because I know who they are. And then we're going to do some support systems and really focus in mental health for our teachers is definitely a priority, as well as our children.
When in the film, we actually really emphasized, because we felt it was really important that parents should model their own vulnerabilities so that their children can see this. Do you encourage the same for teachers? Because now kids in the classroom without mom and dad there, and they're in this with masks in this situation. Can a teacher model their own vulnerability, or is that not a good idea?
Well, I mean, I think it's okay for our teachers to be honest and even say, like, I'm having a hard day today. You know what? I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. I mean, and we're telling our teachers that it's okay to say these things and be honest, especially at the high school level, and teach them, we need to teach our kids healthy coping, and we need to model it. We can't just say, okay, you'll be fine, take a minute to yourself. We have to kind of show them what it looks like. And so we've gone in the classroom, counselors have, and we've kind of modeled what it looks like, and some of our teachers are using it, and it's going to be kind of a daily practice. Even like brain break, in the middle after a lot of instruction. Okay, you know what? I'm feeling very overwhelmed. Let's take a minute and let's just breathe. And we've done some of our Zoom meetings like that at the very beginning. And I'm trying to model to them so then they can do it with their class. So we're learning. We're all learning, and we're all trying new things.
Those
but
are powerful, aren't they? I mean,
yes.
It's amazing.
Yes.
There's a school we filmed in Bali that at 2 p.m. or 1 p.m. they bang the gong, and the whole school stops what they're doing, and for 1 minute it's just silence.
That's awesome.
Everyone, and they just stop, and it resets the whole school. Like it's a palatable, tangible, measurable difference, and that's.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, for jumping off the coping skills, one of the things that is helpful for younger students or students who are maybe having special needs, one of the techniques that you can utilize for breathing is to breathe in the flower, blow out the candle. So they imagine that they're holding a flower in one hand and that they're holding a candle in the other. So that might be something that's useful when we're talking about breathing, deep breathing skills or coping skills. That might be something that can be used on younger children or children who have special needs.
I love that. So breathe in the flower, blow out the candle. So it's a slow breathe in and a quick breathe out.
And there's a lot of great apps. The Calm app is a great app, and a lot of kids have trouble falling asleep at night, and they can't sleep because they're thinking about everything, and just either teaching them journaling, or like there's some sleep stories to kind of help them, or night meditations. I mean, there's a lot of great apps out there.
Out of the room.
Huh?
Take the phone out of the room.
Yes, and that's the thing. I mean, that's
the next movie, actually. So there's we got a little bit, we're just coming down the home stretch here. There's a really great question here, and this was something that we bumped up against in making angst. Is anxiety really on the rise, or are we actually just talking about it more? Are we measuring it now? Is it that, or is it really on the rise? And I'm just curious. I know what I think, but I'm curious what you all think.
Yeah, I'll jump in and go first. I think if we think back, for even being in high school, anxiety has always been around. It's always been there. But for me, I think that we have some extra added things now, social media, and just all these extra pressures that, back when I was in high school, if something happened, it was just at school. Now it leaves school and it lives on and on and on. So I think it is on the rise, but I like to also say that it was there before, because a lot of times we would say, well, those kids just dropped out, or maybe they didn't care. And looking back, I'm going, well, you know what? Maybe that kid had anxiety. Maybe they had a mental health issue that we just wrote them off as, they're not smart, or they don't want to focus. So I think it's on the rise.
As a psychologist now, I can think of a classmate in the first grade who I'm sure was dealing with anxiety.
Mm-hmm. I just think everybody's been not diagnosed maybe, and now there's more education and we know more and teachers know more. And that was what the beauty of angst was, because I felt like a lot of teachers really didn't even understand it themselves. And I had a lot of teachers come in and say, I think maybe I mean, I might be having, I have anxiety. And so getting them help, and maybe they were using unhealthy coping, self-medication, other things. And so that's the power in it. And I don't think we knew as much about it like when I was growing up. And so I think, now a lot of teachers, are kind of getting more educated on it. And so they're kind of looking in themselves and learning. And so that's the power of this movie.
We actually address that in the next movie, which is the second film in the trilogy. It's called Like. And we actually do a deep dive into, so many people that we filmed and talked to in Making Angst felt for sure that anxiety was 100% on the rise. And they felt that it was because of social media and technology and the role that technology played in our lives. So we went off and made Like, and really just dove into that topic, and I won't give it away, so you'll have to just tune into Like to get the answer. And so I'll just leave it at that. Let's see. I want to make sure we leave enough time. We've got a couple of questions here that are kind of like asked a couple of different ways, but it's the same question. With everything going on with the pandemic, how do we differentiate between normal anxiety and everyday fears versus an anxiety disorder that will pass with time? I don't know if an anxiety disorder will pass with time, but how do we deal, I think with just the pandemic, how do we differentiate between like normal anxiety or even extreme anxiety and everyday fears versus an actual anxiety disorder? And actually, this is probably the #1 asked question in our Q&As is, how do I know if my child's student, loved one, colleague actually has just extreme anxiety or an actual anxiety disorder, and what do I do?
Typically, we look at intensity, frequency, and duration, right? So those kind of 3 things. We all have anxiety, but if the frequency is increasing, if the duration, how long it's lasting, and if the intensity, it went from just being, okay, mom, I'm a little anxious, to, oh my gosh, I'm throwing up and I can't get out of the car to go to school, then we know we're kind of bordering in that line where this is not just that normal anxiety, that something different's happening. So it's sitting back and looking at, is this thing getting more intense? Is it happening more often? And is it lasting for a longer period of time? I think just really simply as a parent to kind of take that in and answer those questions for yourself. And then that'll lead you to me to kind of like going in and seeking treatment.
Yeah, I think that intensity, all those things I agree with. Like the girl that I mentioned that I evaluated this morning, who's 12, she was able to differentiate mood from anxiety. So when I asked her to rate her anxiety on a scale of 0 to 10, it was a 10. When I asked her about mood and I put it in words that she could understand, she rated her mood problem as a 4. So when we talked about depression and that kind of stuff, and then talked about, well, what do you think about with regard to depression, and then what's the content around anxiety? So what I'm saying about that is she, as a 12-year-old, recognized that anxiety was impairing her ability to function, but she wasn't feeling depressed, and she denied suicidal ideation, although she had it once like a year ago. So I think kids can, if we have the right words, and I use rating scales all the time because kids seem to be able to handle those.
Mm-hmm. We have a really interesting question here from Tia Manning. How do we address the conversations that are going on about social injustice with kids? As a person of color, I can't not have the news on. I mean, in addition to COVID, we have all the civil unrest. We have a lot of shifting and changing going on. We have explosions in baby. Like there's just a lot going on. But specifically to that, how do we address that conversation with our kids?
I think you have the conversation. One of the things, I have a 13-year-old and 15-year-old, and just realizing TikTok, TikTok is real hot right now, but how much they're learning, not just about dances, but what is going on politically, what is going on in our climate. So sometimes we kind of think our kids don't know, but they're more up on it than we are. So it's having those conversations, right? It's just being able to say, what do you know about that? And not necessarily filling in the blank, but opening the dialogue, not being afraid of it, because our kids have opinions. And if we aren't asking those questions, then we don't have the ability to help them understand things that may be way more complex than they know.
And Dr. Neely, we were having a conversation, and I thought this was a really fascinating statistic. And I think if I got the number right, you know, less than 4% of licensed therapists in the nation are Black. So there's 96% are not. Is that a pretty accurate statistic?
I'm not sure about that number. I know that I think it's a growing number, but I'm not sure specifically. And I think that whether, you know, having different therapists of all races is so important, because a lot of people come seek me out and they'll say, well, I wanted a Black therapist. And initially I remember thinking, well, why do you think just because I'm a Black therapist, I'm going to be able to relate? But as they sometimes talk, there are things they're experiencing that they feel like having somebody that maybe has had that same experience are going to be able to connect. So I think that that diversity of counselors is so, so important.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting, all that's going on. I think I heard that number on 60 Minutes a couple weeks ago, so, but I'll have to check that stat. Let's see, we have a couple other questions. Actually, I would love to ask, because we have some time, I would love for each panelist, if you could just say, what one thing would you want anyone who's watching this to know, or to feel, or to remember from this conversation? What's like so important that you really want them to know? Feel free to jump in.
Should I start?
Yeah.
I think, you know, from the film and from the conversation itself, the one thing that I want people to take away from this entire experience is really the importance of balancing that line of talking, but also actively listening, and not just, you know, hearing and brushing off what is being told to you, and taking it seriously and seeking out the right treatment and the right help when that's applicable, regardless of what the trigger is, whether it may be bullying or cyberbullying or, you know, anything else going on in the environment and the climate in the world. You know, we have to do a better job of saying things and of listening to them.
Beautiful.
And I'll jump on that with that, Kayla. Just with, you know, being a child-centered play therapist, I tell parents all the time, it's so important that you validate your children's feelings. Validate, validate, validate. That is one thing that, you know, don't be dismissive. Don't fix their problems, just listen to them. And I tell every parent that that's the most important thing. You don't have to solve the solutions, or, you know, we're not here to do that, but we really want to let our children know that we are listening to them and that they are important. So validation for me is the most important thing I tell parents on a regular basis. Not only that, but that anxiety is normal and that's treatable, and that, you know, it's important that we normalize the stigma with mental health and letting parents know that it's okay to have anxiety. To me, when I think about, you know, children that are on medication, if my child had, you know, some type of other disorder, right? If they need insulin because they had diabetes, we would treat it, but we don't treat the anxiety because it's seen as such a stigma. And so we really want to try and let people know that it's okay to have anxiety, it's okay, and it's treatable. And like I said, I really want parents to know, just to please validate your child, because it's so important for their self-esteem and for their development going forward.
And I'm going to piggyback off of that. You know, it's okay to be, you know, it's okay to not be okay, or I can't even talk, but it's okay to not be okay, but also to ask for help. And, you know, whether it's your pediatrician, you start there, whether, you know, you go to your school teacher and, you know, the classroom teacher, or you ask the counselor, don't be afraid to talk about it. And once we start to talk about it, then we're going to be able to help our child the best. And, you know, and just that stigma with mental health, if your child sees that you're not having a hard day and you're expressing it, then they're going to be more likely to express it to you and to create that safe place for your child. I mean, and just to ask for help.
Yeah, and it's easy to feel isolated in what you're experiencing in whatever situation or whatever package that might be in. It might be you as a parent and what you're struggling with or going through with your child. You might feel unique or isolated or alone. It might be you as a student and what you're going through. You might feel isolated and alone, and that nobody understands what you're going through. And the reality is that there are so many people, once you start to talk about it, there are so many other people going through very similar things, if not exactly the same thing. So once we destigmatize mental illness, and once we start talking to other people, and once we start seeking help, we realize that there are so many resources out there. There are so many people that are there that are wanting to help and will walk alongside you through this process, through this experience.
And I think just kind of going in that same line, to me, it's no shame. We are all struggling with something. And so get out of your head, stop thinking you're the only one, stop thinking that, you know, if anybody knew, if people know, they're probably going to come closer to you. They're going to be drawn in, because once we know somebody else is struggling, then it makes it easier for us to tell our story. So perfection is a myth. We're all struggling. Let's talk about it. Let's be open, because that's how you're going to be able to really move the needle for your life and for your kid's life.
Yeah, I would just say that anxiety is normal usually, but as Sheila alluded to earlier, sometimes it's not normal, and sometimes it passes a point. And as Dr. Neely was saying, it's about intensity and how much it's impairing functioning. And if you can't get your kid to give you a 10-point rating, be honest with yourself and rate on a scale of 0 to 10, how impaired is this causing them to be? And once it's past the point of being acceptable, get help, because the good news is we do well with most anxiety. We can help.
And, oh, I guess that's me. Thank you all very much. My little, something I hope everyone would take away is, a lot of times, whether it's our kids or a family member or a colleague, how are you? Fine. Everything okay? Yep. Mm-hmm. Two things, actually. I'm going to bundle it into one. One is to make sure we take care of ourselves, and that we are kind to ourselves, and that we connect with ourselves. And the other is, when you're seeing someone who you think something might be going on, but they're not opening up, if they're your kid or someone in your family, just tell them how much you love them. I think that just, I feel like it changes the brain. I feel like it has an effect. It's so powerful. I think love cuts through everything. And even all the stuff we're going through right now, at the end of the day, I think love is going to win. And I think we forget that because we move so fast. So I wanted to make, I have a last announcement, and then we're going to wrap this up. As we wrap up some heavy content, we want to encourage families to take a stand together. David's Legacy Foundation is having a social media challenge for families. To go to the website, you can order pledge stickers and take the pledge together to never use your device as a weapon. And there you can see it right behind Kayla. Snap a photo of your family taking this pledge together and tag DLF, David's Legacy Foundation, for some ongoing contests and features. We hope to see you in September as we continue these conversations with the second part of this trilogy, which I alluded to earlier, and I already mentioned what that was. So I want to invite you all to that. And I am, I think, Ian, maybe you can put that in the chat if people want to grab that link to register. And also Ian has already put into the chat a little digital goodie bag from David's Legacy Foundation and ANGST curriculum to download. And then additionally, people have asked if your significant other or someone you think needs to see this, it is going to be, David's Legacy has made it available for the next 2 weeks in a way that we don't make available to people, because we really just do these community screenings. But you will be able to access the content for $10. And it will give you the curriculum, the David's Legacy materials. You'll have access to the movie and this panel. So I think it should probably be up in the next 24 hours. And I'm sure David's Legacy Foundation will let you know that you can reach out to them as well. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you all panelists. It was so great meeting you. You are all so interesting. I wish I could have dinner with each and every one of you separately. So please take care, stay safe, and we will see you in September for the screening of Like. Kayla, what day is it? It's September
17th, 5:30 Central.
Okay, save the date. Thank you.
See you then.
Thank
Alrighty.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.